There's no point in trying to sugarcoat it. Germany, once admired for its efficiency, seems stuck in a state of permanent crisis and has to watch as almost all its neighbors overtake it in key areas such as growth and innovation. Germany's problems are fundamental. Its infrastructure outdated. The collapsed bridge in Dresden is a haunting symbol of Germany's faltering ability to hold up under pressure. A difficult future awaits, but the restructuring of industry is faltering and the ambitious switch to sustainable production is only inching forward. Why is that? Are companies not doing enough? Or is government policy stifling innovation? We'll analyze the reasons and discuss what needs to happen. We ask, recession and a deadlocked government, is the German economy going down the drain? Hello and welcome to The Point. Let me introduce my panel today. Valerie Höhde, a journalist with Germany's leading liberal broadsheet Süddeutsche Zeitung. Wendeline von Bredow, Berlin correspondent for The Economist magazine. And John Kampfner, a British writer and journalist. Now, John, I want to start with you. You're in the midst of writing your 8th book, in which you travel to inspiring countries that are dealing with challenges of our times. Now, welcome to Berlin. How inspired do you feel?
This book isn't about Germany, so that will fit your agenda very well. But it is about actually saying to readers, and the readers could be German, they could be British, American, French, or from anywhere, that there are solutions out there, or at least there are people trying to do interesting things. And most of the challenges that we face, demographic, immigration, a potential new pandemic, skills, artificial intelligence, and more are shared. And it's a question of actually pooling best practice and trying to learn from others, and including surprising countries, not just the sort of usual cliche of Scandinavian countries and elsewhere. And that's the task that Germany has now that you'll want to discuss, but it's also shared with so many other countries.
Now, when looking at Germany and also at the public discourse here, one gets the impression the whole country is indeed going downhill fast. Nothing seems to work. Bridges are crumbling, schools are crumbling. How bad is it really?
I feel like Germans do possess this quality of being quite negative and pessimistic about the future also. So, you know, it's one thing to say things are bad right now, but they'll get better. But here, the consensus at the moment seems to be things are bad and they're getting worse, and they're going to get worse, and then they're going to get worse. It's like there's almost no psychological point where or people or persons who represent, well, you know what? It's not so good right now. Also, it's not like terrible compared on like a global level. It's not great, but we could do better, and we will do better. So that is like missing from every discourse now.
Do you think it's a mindset thing as well?
I do. I think psychologically speaking, you know, consumers are very insecure. The companies don't want to invest, and it is a lot of psychology behind it. And I do feel that there's this, basically, this insecurity kind of spread, and it doesn't seem that the government is in any way capable of actually addressing that and giving orientation.
Do you think a blood, sweat and tears speech of some kind by Olaf Scholz or maybe even Robert Habeck would be able to kind of lift the spirits?
Yes, I think decisive leadership is the one thing we haven't had from the traffic light coalition, from the Ampel coalition. So I think that would help. And I will say it's a little bit more. I mean, Germans do have that gloom and doom tendency, but I think at the moment there is reason to be not to be very cheerful, because Germany is, I think it's only the second time in post-war history that Germany is in a recession for 2 consecutive years. I think it happened about 20 years ago, and now it's happening now. And there is a little bit of growth forecast for next year and then for the one after, but I mean, it'll be very tepid for a long time. And then there are all these enormous challenges. Energy prices have come down, but they're still high. There's the demographic shift. There's geopolitical uncertainty, which is not going to go away in the very near future. And there is a completely dysfunctional government and elections next year, but, you know, it'll take time for the new government to settle. So at the moment, it's not looking great.
I just want to add, it's a fine line to be drawn. Sensible governments need to level with their people. They need to say, these are the challenges that we face, and these are the reforms that we need to introduce, and some of them are going to be painful, and you're required to make sacrifices. Just bringing it back briefly to the UK, Britain suffered for the last 8 or 10 years with basic clownishness, childishness, boosterism from Boris Johnson and the people that ran the country in an absurd way. It now has, since July the 4th, a sensible, grown-up government. However, what this new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has done is, in some ways, to level up so much with the people that things are, if you think they're bad now, they're only going to get worse. And again, and again, and again. And what's happened is not only has his opinion poll ratings completely collapsed, but consumer confidence has also collapsed because people have taken him at his word and said, oh, my God, it's terrible. We better, and which then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Right. So you need to do both. You need to have this leadership, which, as Gretchen says, is clearly not here at the moment. But at the same time, you need to engender a sense of direction and optimism.
Also, before we go into our next item, Melanie, your newspaper once called Germany the sick man of Europe. The Handelsblatt recently called Germany economic ballast for Europe. Yeah. This is not just a German problem, is it?
It's not just a German problem, because Germany is by far the most important economy in Europe. And when Germany suffers, as it does at the moment, so does the rest of Europe. So it does have consequences. If you look since 2019, actually the Eurozone has been remarkably resilient, except for Germany. So if you look at the growth rates in other countries, including sort of surprising countries like Spain and Greece, they've actually been quite robust, except for Germany, which has hardly grown at all since 2019. So many problems actually predate the pandemic. Some problems, such as the energy price shock, geopolitical uncertainty, are not of Germany's making. But then there are many homemade ones, like the failure to invest in digital infrastructure, the failure to invest in physical infrastructure, this obsession with a debt brake, you know, all these things Germany itself could have done better.
Let's have a closer look at the problems we are currently facing. Germany did enjoy 10 good years of growth and prosperity, but successive governments failed to use this time, as we've just heard, to future-proof the country and its economy. Now that the good times are over, the investment backlog is reaching dangerous levels.
The collapsed Carola Bridge in Dresden has become a symbol of Germany's dilapidated infrastructure. The country's rail network is overburdened. Germans have almost become accustomed to trains running late or not at all. Aviation is also seeing a downturn because air traffic control costs and aviation taxes have doubled since 2020. They are now the highest in Europe, according to the German Aerospace Center. And Germany's industry? ThyssenKrupp was to showcase transitioning to sustainable operation at its steel plant in Duisburg, the largest in Europe. But the company is threatening to abandon the effort, despite 2 billion euros in government subsidies. Green hydrogen is expensive and not yet available in sufficient quantities. Thousands of jobs are at risk. VW is also in crisis. The flagship German car maker shares part of the blame, having missed the switch to electric mobility by years. Chinese competitors are far ahead, thanks in part to government subsidies. Job cuts and plant closures in Germany are looming. Just how burnt out is the once admired German economy?
Yeah, I'd like to pass that question on. And add to that, the statement by the president of Germany's industry organization, the BDI. He said Germany is on the losing track. Is it?
Well, I think it's like you're at a fork in the road and it could go either way, right? I mean, of course, there are a lot of things that are going very wrong, and the government is not helping by fighting openly. They've been fighting basically for two years at least, openly about the course or the direction in which the country should go. So there's just no orientation, and that is a big problem. And I don't see Chancellor Scholz or Vice Chancellor Habeck or the Finance Minister Christian Lindner in any way solving this problem, because basically all three of them are always pitted against each other. Mm-hmm. And it's like they'll come up with a plan, and then like a week later, one of them will go, well, actually, this was a terrible plan. We're not going to do that. And so it really fuels all the insecurity on so many levels.
Well, they're in campaign mode now already, because there's going to be a big election next September. But also, we'll look at the politics in a moment. But I'd like to ask you, what has German industry... We heard that VW didn't really switch onto the electric car market. What has German industry failed to do?
Yeah, well, one thing one has to see that the head of the BDI, it's his job, right, to sound the alarm. So it's always even gloomier coming from him. But German industry has... Well, Germany is very manufacturing heavy, right? And it also needs a lot of energy. So there are some industries like the chemical industry and other industries that consume about 80% of the energy imported. So there is a bit of an imbalance which will probably change over the next few years. German industry per se has not done anything wrong, but it's more it's more that the government policies are not very business friendly, and it's anything from bureaucracy to digitalization to all these things that haven't happened.
When you compare it with the United States, and your introduction talked of infrastructure here and bridges collapsing. In the United States, infrastructure is a disaster area. Airports, not many trains, roads in a pretty bad condition. And yet, American growth has been strong and consistently stronger. I take your point about the Eurozone being stronger than Germany's, but America's outperformed the Eurozone most of the time over the last many years. And that comes down to several things. One is the focus on research, development, innovation, but a culture of risk-taking and supporting startups and companies that want to do things. And I know it's a cliche about Germany, but it happens to be true. But here it's all about retrenching, not taking risks, being cautious. It's incredibly hard to be an entrepreneur here.
This is the country of Robert Bosch and Werner von Siemens. But in the past 20 years, the number of companies founded in Germany has halved. Is there...
Yeah, there is something about the risk-taking culture which is not very developed, certainly compared with America here, right? And there is a startup scene in Berlin, but it's quite small compared to other countries. But generally, I mean, I think there is a lot of entrepreneurial genie and entrepreneurial drive in Germany. It's just it gets frustrated a lot. Yeah. And, it is an alarm. I mean, we've talked about VW, but it is really alarming if a company like a Mittelstand star, like Stihl, a maker of chainsaws, goes to Switzerland for its new production site, even though Switzerland's really a high-cost country. But they prefer it because it's business friendlier. Or Miele, the maker of washing machines, also outsources some of their production. So I think the entrepreneurship is here, and there are these amazing hidden champions, these wonderful Mittelstand companies. But it's the framework, it's the environment that is not very business friendly. It's too much bureaucracy. It's too slow. It's too hard to hire foreign workers or skilled workers. It takes too long. The onboarding takes ages. All these things, and together they make it very difficult for entrepreneurship to thrive.
is bureaucracy, which we've mentioned a couple of times, and which is, of course, terrible in Germany, but is it really worse than in other European countries?
Because I don't live in other European countries, I'm not sure, but I will, like, an example of this is now in a lot of companies, even where you work creatively, you have to put down the times in which you're working.
In Germany, yes.
Right, and this is supposed to protect workers from working too much, which is a noble cause. But if you have people, then like putting in a half an hour here, half an hour there, I'm not sure how you guys work, but the way I work is like, you know, it's a lot of back and forth. And if you actually have to do that, there's, first of all, you are going to work too much because that's just the way it kind of works. In a lot of industries where you're creative or you're thinking about things or you're coming up with ideas, that's not something that you can really put in a time log. So I think that that's a good example of where bureaucracy is supposed to protect a certain standard, but it ends up being difficult for the whole country.
Yeah.
And it's not really...
Yeah, I can actually, I've just traveled a bit in Scandinavia, and so I can compare because I've just heard from all these Scandinavian bosses. And yes, the bureaucracy here is worse than, for instance, in Denmark, where it's quite easy to hire people, it's also quite easy to fire them. So it's a very fluid labor market, and job protection is not so high, but unemployment, there's nearly full employment. Unemployment is incredibly low, so it works better.
And it's been rising in Germany recently.
Exactly, and it's been rising in Germany, whilst in Scandinavia, and so there is too much bureaucracy, and things are working too slowly, and they're too complicated.
But I'm pleased what you said about entrepreneurship here and the Mittelstand.
Yeah.
I mean, Germany now has the reputation and has worked itself up into a state of being the sort of the clunky bureaucratic country where you can't get things done. But it wasn't always like that. I mean, the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, was based in entrepreneurship, innovation of its time. And there is an apprenticeship scheme and a set of skills-based learning here that is the envy of the world.
Yeah.
And there's just something that can be unlocked here that could absolutely, the sort of science, the emphasis on science and research is very strong here. And I was thinking during the pandemic that the health tech scene could absolutely, I mean, it is doing pretty well, but it could absolutely explode. Germany could be the sort of number one, but it just comes down to this ability to harness innovation.
I agree, because we have a tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think there is still all that talent and all that. I mean, it was BioNTech, right, with Pfizer,
absolutely.
who found the first effective COVID vaccine, and all that's still there. So I think, you know, there's always a tendency to then go too pessimistic and go short Germany, so to speak. Yeah.
Well, I do think there's such a profound fear of failure in this country.
Absolutely.
And it's like you're not allowed to fail. And I think that's really something that we could work on collectively as media, also as politicians, where there has to be more room for error. It's not so bad to make a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. But even saying that is something we nearly never hear in the public discourse.
It's interesting as well that you mentioned the media. Of course, we share in the responsibility for this. But I want to look also at the role of Germany's government. Germany's centre-left government is being blamed for the country's many ills, and it has been hammered by negative reports in the media. And the coalition parties had to stomach staggering losses in regional elections. The economics minister and vice-chancellor, as well as his party, the Greens, are facing especially harsh criticism.
Economics Minister Robert Habeck wants a green transformation of German industry, but is forced to announce a recession for the second year in a row. He tries to be optimistic. The overall situation is not satisfactory, but we can certainly see progress in dealing with problems. The minister cites lower inflation as an example. The many critics of the Greens see this very differently. They hold him and his party responsible for all the problems facing Germany. Leading the way, Bavaria's chief minister. Habeck also faces permanent resistance within his own government. Finance Minister Lindner is opposed to increasing government debt for more investment. The Greens themselves are in crisis. Their leadership duo has resigned after defeats in state elections, while much of the leadership of the party's youth group has moved on. Voters are turning away, and industry support is lukewarm. Has the dream of a green economic miracle been shattered?
How much of the current situation, Bendelini, you think can actually be pinned on the current government, and how much is inherited, among others, from the Merkel government?
I mean, they had a very difficult start, right? They came into government and then Russia attacked Ukraine. So the first months were just an emergency situation. And so that's number one. Number two, they did inherit a lot of a difficult legacy from the Merkel years because of her China policies and her Russia policies and COVID. So all these things, there was still a COVID legacy. So they really had a tough start. And plus it's a very disparate coalition of three parties. There's not much love lost between the Free Democrats and the Greens. There's simply too dissimilar. And I think there've been many, many times, I think more times than we realize, at breaking point. But there's also a lot of, they could have done better, right? It's a little bit also the personality of Scholz, who likes to always wait and act behind the scenes at a time when forceful leadership is needed. And that's the one thing he really hasn't shown.
Somebody said that currently Scholz is acting like a referee and not like a captain of the team. But Germany's green economy minister, Habeck, has been constantly in the crossfire. Rightly so?
I think so. I think he made a lot of mistakes. The Heizungsgesetz, as we call it in Germany, which was a policy that was supposed to shift the way you heat your home from gas to a climate-neutral alternative. And that is, I think the goal is absolutely right. I think the way he tried to implement it was wrong because basically they said, okay, until this year, you have to start heating with this alternative system without saying how people were going to actually finance it. And I think that was, for Germans who love stability, yet another cliche, yet another truth, that was absolutely devastating that someone from the government was basically, so to speak, coming into their home and changing out their heating system. It was a core blow. And I really think that the way they handled this communication crisis was terrible. And a lot of trust was lost.
We've mentioned that Germans love stability, are not really keen on change. Is this current crisis really a government failure and an industry failure, or is it a failure of the whole of German society as it presents itself today?
Well, it's a bit of everything, but politics does set the tone for countries. And when we're talking about Robert Habeck and the heat pump problem, it's often forgotten that, Germany was bequeathed a almost total dependency on Russian gas and oil. And Robert Habeck, the same Robert Habeck, pretty much solved the problem in a year. It was extraordinary what he did. So there is, when this government puts its mind to it, there is that ability to be transformative, which brings me to Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor. So much has been written about his Zeitenwende speech, the one initiating a complete about-turn on Russia and an approach to German defence. What was remarkable, we're not talking about Russia-Ukraine specifics here, but it was an incredible piece of leadership, and he only brought the other two parties in right at the end. He said, I'm going to do this, and I really don't care what people think. I'm going to do this, and the country's going to come along with me. He did it, and as soon as he did it, he then retreated again, timidly. If he had used that, not just, again, talking about that issue of the war, but if he had used that to define his government and say, I'm in charge, you are the two parties, you come with me, come what may, who knows? But I think the country would be looking very different now.
That leads nicely into my last question, because we're running out of time. Do we need another Zeitenwende speech with regard to the economy?
Oh, with regard to the economy, yes, because I thought foreign policy, that's done, right? I mean, you can't redo this. Absolutely. I think, the government has this Wachstumsgesetz, like with 49 measures. So they have this, but they communicated it very tepidly. So I think we who follow these things closely know that there are these 49 measures, but nobody else does. I mean, the wider public doesn't. And so a very forceful speech initiative, I think, would make a big difference.
What do you think, very briefly?
They'd have to be unified for that, and they're not. So I feel like I don't think this coalition can solve these problems.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. That's it for this edition of To The Point. Many thanks to my panel and also to all our viewers. And if you're watching us on YouTube, tell us what you think and become part of the conversation down here in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.